Sooner or later, the draft is coming back. Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and I often tell people that I am a product of the draft. Actually, my dad was the real product of the draft. He chose his education and his employment to qualify for certain exemptions. He bought a house very close to the Canadian border, and he was not going to get drafted into the Army. And then in 1973, the same year I was born, the U.S. adopted the all-volunteer military. And let's be honest, a lot of things have changed for the better in the last 50 years. In fact, my dad was amazed by the difference between the Army I served in compared to the Army that his high school friends had served in. But there's a problem with the way the Army thinks about the all-volunteer force, and that problem permeates everything that we do. It is a dangerous flaw that threatens to cripple our nation at the most pivotal moment. You see, the all-volunteer force can't last forever. Over a long enough time horizon, we will have to resort to the draft. And when that happens, things are going to go from bad to worse. You see, all it takes is a conflict where the number of people in the all-volunteer force isn't enough to accomplish the mission. And at first, you might assume that the size of the military, particularly the Army, is specifically designed to accomplish the national defense strategy. Well, let's assume that's true. The problem isn't really the size of the military that's authorized by Congress. It's the number of people you can get into uniform. So consider this completely plausible sequence of events. There's some major international event that drags the U.S. into a conflict. The Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, September 11th, something like that. In the immediate aftermath of this event, two things are going to happen. Number one, there is going to be an outpouring of patriotic support. Everybody and their brother are going to be showing up at recruiting stations, volunteering to do their part. But the military is going to ignore that surge. The second thing that's going to happen is the president will authorize some kind of military action that uses a reasonable portion of the all-volunteer force. That's why there won't be any effort to take advantage of that surge of volunteerism. Now, if the military response is sufficient, everything's okay, right? I mean, the system is working the way the system is supposed to. Where trouble starts to brew is where the initial military response is not enough, and you have to send more people. So the active duty military sends a larger portion of the people that they have, and they dig deeper into the reserves for additional manpower. Meanwhile, that surge in patriotism, it starts to cool off. So right about the time that the military asks Congress for permission to grow the size of the military in order to take deployment stress off people who are currently in the military, that patriotic surge is almost over. I mean, the greater the need for new soldiers, whether it's because of a bigger conflict or a wider front or more casualties, the less volunteerism you're going to see. And so that strain on the current force and recruiting efforts, it's going to grow and grow until finally something snaps and we have to resort to conscription. So what? Well, number one, there is very little appetite in Congress to reinstate the draft. It will be an incredibly unpopular vote, and that means that Congress will delay that decision as long as they possibly can. And during that time, those who volunteered, they're going to suffer in a lot of unpleasant ways. Second, the implementation of the draft, as well as the training and use of these new inductees, it's going to be sudden and not well planned out. And that leads to the third issue, which is resentment is going to fly in all sorts of directions. Draftees will resent the volunteers for not getting the job done. Volunteers will resent Congress for dragging their feet on making a decision that to them seemed obvious. Congress will resent general officers for the political position that they find themselves in. And all of this is going to be happening while the nation faces some kind of external threat. So what do? Well, I'll tell you what you don't do. You don't hold large-scale war games to figure out how you would implement the draft. That's just going to cause a public panic, and the more you try to keep it secret, the bigger the panic's going to be. Instead, each and every one of us has an obligation to do a simple thought experiment with everything we do. Ask yourself, if I had to train twice as many recruits, how would I do it? Ask yourself, if I had to issue 3 times as many uniforms, how would I do that? Whenever you have to update a policy, ask yourself, if I had to change dozens of policies all at once, how? When you have to deal with a soldier who's willing to do anything to get kicked out of the military, ask yourself, how would I lead an organization where most of the people felt this way? Just like so much that we do, we have to be ready now to deal with the absolute unthinkable. And if you want to get ready for your retirement process, watch this video.